My name's Caleb. I'm 23. And last month, I walked across the stage in my cap and gown with a smile plastered on my face, pretending like my heart wasn't breaking. Graduation was supposed to be one of those rare milestones where a family puts everything aside, comes together, and just celebrates. You only get that moment once. But for me, it was a reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. Always second place. Always the responsible one who kept things running quietly in the background while my younger brother, Ethan, got the spotlight for doing just about anything. To understand why that moment cut so deep, you need to know the family dynamic. Growing up, Ethan was the golden child. He was the kid who got the loudest cheers at his soccer games, even if he spent most of the match sitting on the bench. If he brought home a C on his report card, Mom would say, "At least he tried." That's what matters. Meanwhile, when I came home with straight A's, Dad would glance at my paper, nod, and then ask me if I'd mowed the lawn yet. It was this constant pattern where my achievements were brushed aside, and Ethan's smallest efforts were celebrated like he'd cured a disease. I can't even count how many family dinners ended with me clearing plates in the kitchen while my brother basked in compliments at the table. But I held it together. I worked. I studied. I didn't complain because a part of me thought maybe one day they'll see the difference. Maybe when I hit a real milestone like graduating from college, first in the family, by the way they'd finally look at me with pride. That was naive, I know, but hope has a way of hanging around even when it shouldn't. So, when graduation was getting close, I called home with excitement. I told them the date, explained the ceremony, and asked if they'd like to come. My mom made a non-committal noise, the kind she uses when she's pretending to be interested. My dad was the one who cut in with his usual bluntness. "Caleb, we're busy celebrating your brother," he said. Just like that. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I remember gripping the phone tighter, my mouth going dry. "Celebrating what?" I asked. "He bought a motorcycle," Dad said, almost proudly. Like a motorcycle compared to a college degree made sense. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I felt like I'd just been told the quiet truth I'd suspected all along. Nothing I did was ever going to be enough. I went to my graduation alone. My roommate, Leo, showed up to clap for me, which meant more than I think he realized. He even snapped a picture of me holding my diploma. That's the only photo I have from that day. Later that evening, as I sat down to a quiet dinner I had planned for my family, I scrolled through my phone. My aunt had posted a photo on Facebook. Ethan grinning, his arms slung around Dad, a beer in hand. The caption read, "Family toast for the real winner." My stomach twisted. The real winner. That stung more than anything. My degree didn't matter. For years of grinding through late nights, skipping parties, eating noodles to save money, it was invisible compared to the shiny chrome of a new motorcycle. I paid the bill for my untouched graduation dinner. Anyway, $2,110. That wasn't just for the meal. It was the culmination of all the little ways I had been financially responsible for my family. You see, what they never acknowledged out loud was that I'd been quietly paying down a business loan for years. My dad's business, his pride and joy, had taken out money that, honestly, they couldn't keep up with. I'd stepped in, covering monthly payments without complaint because, well, that's what family does, Mom would say. I told myself I was doing it for stability, for peace, for the hope that one day maybe they'd see I was carrying the weight. But sitting there in that restaurant, watching strangers toast each other while I sat alone on my big day, something in me shifted. The bitterness I'd swallowed for years turned into a cold, sharp realization. I'd been holding up the foundation of a house where I wasn't even welcome inside. And that night, I decided I wasn't going to carry it anymore. When I got home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the loan account. My name was the one linked to the payments. My money had been propping it up for years of sacrifice while my brother coasted and my parents applauded. I hit the button to shut it off. Just like that, the responsibilities slid off my shoulders. Before I left the house the next morning, I printed out the confirmation page, folded it neatly, and placed it on the desk in my parents' office. On top, I left a note. Let him handle it. My hand didn't even shake when I wrote it. For once, I felt calm. By sunrise, my phone lit up with 76 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Ethan back to back, buzzing like they were all waking up from a dream and realizing what reality felt like without me cushioning the blows. And that's where things started to unravel. When the calls started, I ignored them. At first, it was easy. Just silence my phone, tuck it under the pillow, and stare at the ceiling, breathing in that strange mix of guilt and relief. But by mid-morning, when I finally checked, I saw the number, 76 missed calls. 76. From the people who couldn't even drive 20 minutes to sit at my graduation dinner. That irony wasn't lost on me. The voicemails were a whole other story. Mom's voice trembled with a practiced kind of panic, the kind she always used when she wanted something. Caleb, honey, you can't just do this. This is serious. Your father's business depends on you keeping those payments going. Call us back. The second one was sharper. Caleb, stop acting childish. This is not the time for drama. We'll talk later. By the fifth, she had dropped the honey altogether. It was just, Caleb, pick up right now. Dad's messages were short and cutting. What do you think you're doing? Don't mess around with things you don't understand. And the one that played over and over in my head. You're sabotaging your own family. But Ethan Schurz was the one that twisted the knife. He laughed, actually laughed into the phone. Dude, you're overreacting. It's just money. You'll keep paying, don't worry. You've always been the responsible one. As if my role in life was to carry everyone else's weight while he sped around on his shiny new bike, grinning for family photos. That night, I went to bed with my phone on silent, but I couldn't sleep. Every voicemail replayed in my mind not just the words, but the tone, the entitlement, the expectation that I would fold because that's what I'd always done. For years, I'd said yes. I'd swallowed my pride. I'd been invisible. But now that I'd finally said no, suddenly I was the selfish one, the dramatic one, the problem. The next morning, I found out they weren't going to stop at phone calls. My aunties, the same one who posted family toast for the real winner, tagged me in a Facebook post. It was a photo of Ethan sitting on his motorcycle in the driveway, smiling like a kid on Christmas morning. The caption, so proud of this young man. Responsible, hardworking, always taking care of family. He deserves the world. Responsible, hardworking, always taking care of family. My chest actually hurt when I read that, because those were the words that should have been mine. I was the one who'd worked 2 jobs to cover the loan payments. I was the one who'd skipped vacations, skipped nights out, skipped breathing room, just so they could keep their house from foreclosure. And yet here she was, handing my story to Ethan like it was his trophy. The comments piled on. He's such a good son. What a man, already stepping up for the family. Your parents must be so proud. I shut my laptop so hard it rattled the table. By then, the calls had escalated into text. My mom's messages filled the screen. You don't understand the kind of trouble you're causing. This is going to ruin us if you don't fix it. Ethan can't help. You know that. He's just starting out. You're the one with stability. That word again, stability. It was never about me. It was never about my dreams, or my graduation, or even the hours I spent dragging myself through college. I was just the safety net, the stable one, the background character in their story, expected to keep smiling while everyone else took the credit. I tried to distract myself, but the silence in my apartment felt louder than their calls. I kept remembering little things. Christmas mornings when Ethan got the newest gadgets while I unwrapped socks. Birthdays where my cake came from the clearance rack, but his had custom designs. The time he got caught drinking at a party and Dad shrugged it off as boys being boys, while I once came home 5 minutes past curfew and got grounded for a month. It was like all those years of small cuts suddenly bled out at once. 3 days passed before I finally picked up one of their calls. It was Mom. Her voice was sweet at first, sticky sweet, the way it gets when she's about to corner you. Caleb, honey, we just need to talk. We know you're upset about graduation. We're sorry we couldn't be there, but you understand. It was a big day for your brother, too. I almost laughed. A big day for him, buying a motorcycle. My chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. She went on. This isn't the time to make rash decisions. The business loan isn't just about your father. It's about all of us. If you don't make those payments, we could lose everything. Is that what you want? For your family to be homeless? There it was, the manipulation. She didn't say, thank you for keeping us afloat for 4 years. She didn't say, we're proud of you for graduating. She didn't even acknowledge the effort. No, it was straight to guilt. Straight to the big, dramatic, we'll be homeless line. And I realized in that moment that nothing I could say would ever be enough. If I agreed, I'd be trapped again. If I refused, I'd be the villain. There was no winning, at least not on their terms. That night, I sat down at my desk, staring at the stack of old bank statements I'd kept tucked away in a drawer, years of proof that I had been the one quietly holding everything together while they cheered for Ethan. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to being their safety net. Not again. And that decision, that's when the real tension started to unfold. I wish I could say that after days of silence, things cooled down, That maybe my parents took a step back and realized how unfair they'd been. But that's not how this family operates. When they can't guilt me into submission, they escalate. They've done it my whole life. Twist the story, pile on the pressure, make me out to be the unreasonable one until I crack. It was the fourth day after I'd stopped the loan payments when the betrayal landed like a punch in the gut. I was at work, sitting through a training session, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo, my roommate. Bro, are you seeing this? Check Facebook now. I slipped my phone under the table and opened the app. My stomach dropped instantly. There it was, a long post on my mother's profile, written in that dramatic, self-pitying tone she reserves for when she wants to play the victim. My heart is breaking tonight. It began. After all the sacrifices we've made for our oldest son, he's decided to turn his back on his family. We supported him through school, paid his bills, gave him everything, and now, when we need him most, he's abandoned us. Please pray for us during this difficult time. I couldn't breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scrolled through the comments. Neighbors, relatives, church friends, people I'd known my whole life were chiming in with sympathy. I can't believe Caleb would do this to you. How selfish. Don't worry, God will provide. And the worst one, at least you have Ethan. He's such a good son. Ethan had commented too, of course. Don't worry, Mom. I'll always be here for you guys. You can count on me. Count on him for what? He hadn't paid a dime toward that loan. He hadn't lifted a finger to keep their business above water. But there he was, soaking up praise for his empty words while I was being crucified online. By lunchtime, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years messaged me things like, "Why are you doing this to your parents?" One even wrote, "You know Ethan can't handle this stuff. Why would you dump it on him?" Dump it on him? It had been dumped on me for 4 years. When I got home that evening, I found Leo sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. "You okay, man?" he asked gently. He had already printed a screenshot of the post and set it on the coffee table like evidence. "They're throwing you under the bus hard." I just nodded, too angry to speak. It wasn't just that they lied. It was that they rewrote the whole narrative. Suddenly, I was the ungrateful son they'd sacrificed everything for. They erased the fact that I drained my savings every month to keep their business afloat. They erased my graduation, my achievements, my sacrifices. And they did it publicly for everyone to see. Later that night, the phone call started again. Only this time, I answered. It was Dad. His voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "So, this is how it's going to be? You think you can just walk away after everything we've done for you?" I snapped. "What you've done for me? I've been paying your business loan for 4 years with my own money. You never even said thank you. And then you have the nerve to go online and tell everyone you paid for my life." He didn't even pause. "Watch your tone, Caleb. You wouldn't have gotten through school without us. You're alive because of us. Don't forget that. That line, you're alive because of us." It was the exact kind of manipulative card they always played, the one that made me feel like I owed them everything forever. But this time, something inside me hardened. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt betrayal so sharp it burned, as if things weren't bad enough. The next morning, my boss called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable, sliding her phone across the desk. "Caleb," she said softly, "I don't know what's going on with your family, but your mom called here this morning. She said you've been acting unstable, that you're making reckless decisions, and she wanted me to keep an eye on you." I froze. My own mother had called my workplace to smear me, to paint me as unreliable, to make sure if I didn't cave at home, I'd feel the pressure at work, too. I muttered an apology to my boss, promising everything was fine, but my hands shook the entire day. That wasn't just manipulation. That was sabotage. That was my own mother deliberately trying to ruin the one thing I had left that was mine. My job, my independence, my escape. I went home that night and sat in the dark, staring at the wall. It hit me with brutal clarity. There was no going back after this. They hadn't just ignored my graduation. They hadn't just taken me for granted. They had actively turned me into the villain. And now they were trying to crush me publicly, privately, professionally. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt dangerous. And that's when the idea of revenge started to form. The days after my mother's phone call to my job were some of the darkest I can remember. I kept replaying it in my head. Her voice, the way she must have leaned into the phone with that practiced mix of concern and superiority, telling my boss I was unstable. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to weaken me, to make sure I had no place to stand that wasn't under her thumb. The fallout came fast. My boss, though kind enough not to fully buy into it, still treated me differently for the rest of the week. Every time I walked into her office, I could see it in her eyes, doubt. Like she was quietly evaluating whether I was really as reckless as my mother claimed. My coworkers started whispering, too. Not because they knew the details, but because the tension hung around me like a storm cloud. It didn't matter what the truth was. The seed had been planted. My own mother planted it. At home, the silence was unbearable. My phone lit up nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails, family group chats exploding with messages I refused to open. Even my grandmother, who had always been the one person to treat me fairly, sent a short message. Call your mother. She's worried sick. I wanted to scream. She wasn't worried sick. She was cornered. But how do you explain that to someone who's only ever heard her side? By the end of that week, I stopped going out. Leo would knock on my door to check on me, but I usually just muttered something through the wood. Food didn't taste right. Music sounded like noise. The one thing I'd worked so hard for me degree, my future suddenly felt small compared to the weight of the betrayal. One night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the bank statements I'd pulled earlier. Line after line of payments I had made, month after month, for 4 years. Rent money, food money, savings money all drained into a loan that wasn't mine. I traced the numbers with my finger until my eyes blurred. That was my 20s so far. My youth, my chance to enjoy being young, wasted because I thought I was keeping a family together. And where had it gotten me? Alone, humiliated, and branded as selfish. That's when the bitterness began to turn into something else. A plan. Not a full one yet, not with steps and details, but the beginnings of resolve. If they could lie about me publicly, maybe it was time to let the truth speak for itself. If they could erase my sacrifices, maybe I could make them impossible to ignore. But before I could get to that point, I had to sit in the pit a while longer. 2 weeks passed, and the messages didn't stop. They got nastier. Mom wrote, "You've always been dramatic, Caleb. We thought college would mature you, but clearly it hasn't." Dad sent, "When this all comes crashing down, don't come crawling back." Ethan sent, "Bro, just turn the payments back on. You know you'll end up doing it anyway." That last one burned the most. He said it like my role as the family's financial safety net wasn't even up for debate, like it was inevitable. Meanwhile, their Facebook campaign continued. Another photo of Ethan, this time helping Dad in the garage. Caption, "A real man steps up when times are tough. So proud of our son." The comments gushed again, as if he'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. I nearly threw my phone across the room. I stopped checking Facebook after that. It wasn't worth watching my own story get rewritten in real time. But even as I turned away from their noise, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this be my life. Me in the shadows, them in the spotlight, my sacrifices erased and replaced by their fiction. Late one night, I sat with Leo at the kitchen table. He was eating cereal out of the box and watching me quietly. "So what now?" he finally asked. I shrugged. "I don't know." "Yeah, you do," he said. "You're just not saying it yet." He was right. Deep down, I knew exactly what had to happen, but saying it out loud made it real. So instead, I just looked at him and whispered, "I can't keep being their safety net. Not anymore. If they want to keep lying, then they can live with the truth when it finally catches up." Leo leaned back, nodded slowly, and said nothing more. Sometimes silence says enough. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Not peacefully, not dreamlessly, but with a strange calm that comes when you've finally accepted that the old chapter is closed, even if the new one hasn't begun. And that calm, that tiny seed of resolve, was the beginning of everything that came next. It's strange how once you accept that a door is closed, you start noticing other ones waiting to be opened. The first few weeks after I shut down the loan payments were suffocating, but once I let myself stop carrying the guilt, something shifted. For the first time in years, I had extra money in my account at the end of the month. It wasn't much, but seeing those numbers not immediately drained by someone else's debt, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. The timing couldn't have been better. My degree in finance wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It started opening real opportunities. A former professor connected me with a mid-sized firm downtown, and after a couple of interviews, I landed an entry-level analyst position. The pay wasn't astronomical, but it was mine. No strings, no family obligations tied to it. The first paycheck I deposited felt like the most valuable money I'd ever earned, even though it was less than what I'd made scraping together side jobs during school. Because this time, I didn't owe it to anyone. Meanwhile, Leo became my biggest supporter. He'd clap me on the shoulder when I came home late, reminding me, "One step at a time, man." Sometimes he'd even shove a bowl of ramen into my hands and say, "Eat now, scheme later." It sounds small, but after years of carrying everything alone, those little gestures felt enormous. I started to rebuild, slowly. I paid down my own student debt, something I'd barely touched because my parents' loan had always come first. I bought myself a secondhand laptop, something faster than the ancient one I'd been using since high school. I even went out with coworkers once or twice, sitting in bars I used to avoid because I couldn't justify spending $10 on a drink. Every step forward made me stronger, but it also highlighted just how much I had given up before. I thought about all the times I skipped out on things to save money, only to funnel it into my parents' business debt. I thought about the years of working double shifts at the campus library while my classmates traveled or interned. And now I realized it wasn't that I couldn't afford those experiences. I just wasn't allowed to because I was too busy holding up a family that would never admit it. The best part? Word started to spread through the extended family about my job. My cousin Chloe, one of the few relatives who actually believed me, messaged me on Instagram. "Congrats on the new role." That's amazing. Slowly, people outside my immediate family started to see me as something other than the villain my parents painted online. Of course, Mom and Dad didn't see it that way. When they eventually found out about my new job, Mom left a voicemail dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, so now you can help again. Good. We'll talk soon about the loan." The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. Even after everything, the post, the lies, the sabotage, they still believed I'd come crawling back the moment I had steady income. I didn't return the call. Instead, I started preparing. One evening, I dug out the box under my bed where I'd been keeping every scrap of proof, bank statements, email confirmations, screenshots of payments. For years' worth of evidence that Ethan, not my parents, had been the one shouldering the business loan. Looking at the neat stack of documents, I realized I was holding power for the first time. They had their stories, their lies, their public image. But I had the receipts. Literal receipts. The more I built my own life, the more I saw how fragile theirs actually was. Their business was crumbling without my support. Rumors started circulating that Dad was missing payments. One of their suppliers even called me directly, assuming I was still involved, asking about late invoices. I told him politely but firmly that I was no longer connected to the business. He sighed and muttered, "Figures. You were the only one who ever answered emails on time." That comment stuck with me. People were starting to notice. The cracks were widening. At the same time, I began to grow socially in ways I hadn't before. At work, I impressed one of the senior partners by staying late to fix a messy spreadsheet before a client presentation. He told me I had a good head for strategy. For someone like me, who had spent years being told I was dramatic, immature, or selfish, it was like fuel. Someone finally saw me for what I was capable of. I didn't broadcast any of this to my family. I kept quiet, let them believe I was still floundering without them. But inside, I was building momentum. Every step forward, every small win, every dollar saved it was all stacking up into something I knew would matter later. And as I sat there one night, flipping through my stack of bank statements, a thought crystallized in my mind. They had spent years erasing me. But what happens when the erased one starts writing the story himself? I smiled to myself, tucked the papers back into the box, and thought, they won't see this coming. The first real crack in their armor came by accident. I was at work one Friday evening, wrapping up a report, when I overheard two partners talking in the hallway. One mentioned my father's company by name. My ears pricked instantly. Apparently, my dad's business had approached the firm months earlier seeking financial advice. They'd been denied because their books were a mess, expenses hidden, debts shuffled, payments delayed. I froze at my desk. I'd always suspected things were bad, but hearing professionals describe the company as a sinking ship waiting for a spark made my chest tighten. Later that night, I went home and opened the old loan documents again. I'd always focused on the payments, the money flowing out of my account, but this time I paid attention to the fine print. And that's when I noticed something I'd never let myself think too hard about before. Legally, I was listed as a guarantor, not just a kind-hearted son covering bills. My signature tied me to their mess. My parents hadn't just leaned on me. They'd locked me into responsibility without ever asking if I truly understood the risk. I had been 19 when I signed, home for the weekend, Dad thrusting papers in front of me with a casual, "Just sign here so we can keep things running." Back then, I'd been too eager to prove I was trustworthy, too desperate for their approval. I signed without reading every clause. And that mistake had cost me years. But now I was older, wiser, and sitting on years of proof that I hadn't just been helping out. I'd been exploited. I started quietly talking to contacts at work, not directly about my family, but in general about loan guarantors, small business liability, and what happens when payments stop. One of the senior associates, a woman named Sarah, leaned back in her chair one afternoon and said something that clicked. When people misuse guarantors, it almost always comes back to bite them. Courts don't like manipulation, especially if there's documentation. Documentation. That word echoed in my head as I pictured the neat stack of bank statements under my bed. At the same time, I noticed a shift in how my family interacted online. Their Facebook posts had grown less triumphant. Instead of bragging about Ethan's motorcycle or the real winner, they were suddenly quieter, sharing vague quotes about hard times and faith being tested. I even saw a post from my aunt asking for donations to help keep the family business afloat. Donations. The same people who once called me selfish were now publicly begging strangers for help. And then came the message that sealed my decision. Ethan texted me one night. "Yo, Dad says the bank's on our case. Just turn the payments back on for a while until things settle, okay? Be a team player." A team player. Like I was just a cog in their machine, expected to keep spinning until it broke me completely. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a single sentence. "I'm not on your team anymore." No response came back, but I knew that silence meant they were panicking. Meanwhile, at work, I was excelling. I'd been assigned to a new project analyzing distressed businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally being trained to spot the patterns I'd lived through with my parents. The deeper I got into the project, the clearer the picture became. My father's company wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing, and without me, they were weeks away from default. That knowledge gave me a strange sense of power. For years, I had been the invisible backbone, the one propping them up without recognition. Now, I had stepped away, and they were wobbling on their own. One night, Leo found me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, highlighter marks everywhere. "You're plotting," he said flatly. "Preparing," I corrected. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" I tapped the stack of bank statements and said, "For the day they try to drag me back down with them. Because they will. And when they do, I'm not going to be the quiet son who just takes it anymore. I'll have everything I need." Leo grinned. "Good. About time." It wasn't just preparation anymore. It was strategy. Every email, every statement, every signed document went into a folder organized by date. I backed it all up on a drive. I even started writing a timeline of events, from the moment Dad first shoved those papers in front of me to the night I shut off the loan payments. Piece by piece, I was building not just a defense, but leverage. And the best part? They had no idea. To them, I was still the weak link, the son sulking in silence, too immature to face reality. They thought they had the upper hand. But for the first time in my life, I knew something they didn't. The higher they climbed on their lies, the harder they'd fall when the truth finally hit. And I would be the one to strike the match. The day my revenge started wasn't loud. There was no dramatic showdown, no screaming match at a family dinner. It began with a quiet letter. I had spent weeks assembling everything. Bank statements, signed loan documents, screenshots of text messages, copies of their Facebook posts bragging about Ethan while I was silently footing the bills. I organized it all into a neat binder, each section tabbed, each page dated. If you flipped through it, the story was undeniable. A 19-year-old tricked into signing papers, a young man sacrificing years of his life to cover a debt that wasn't his, and a family who twisted that sacrifice into lies. Then, I walked into the bank. The loan officer recognized my father's name instantly. His expression tightened when I handed him the binder. "I think you should see this," I said calmly. He skimmed through the first few pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. After a few minutes, he leaned back in his chair. "You've been the one making the payments?" "For 4 years," I replied. "Not my father, not my brother, just me." He closed the binder, exhaled slowly, and said, "Mr. Anderson, this changes things." That was the moment the tide turned. By documenting everything, I made it clear that I wasn't just some irresponsible guarantor who walked away. I was the victim of manipulation. And the bank, suddenly realizing they'd been misled, had no choice but to adjust how they handled the account. Within a week, my parents got the first letter from the bank demanding payment in full. Without my contributions, they were already behind. And now the bank had stripped away their usual excuses. My father called me that night, his voice shaking with anger. "What did you do?" he barked. "I told the truth," I said simply. You've ruined us. Do you understand that? No, Dad. You ruined yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, but I wasn't done. The next step was more public, though still controlled. I reached out to my grandmother, the one relative I trusted. I asked her if she'd like to see something important. She came to my apartment, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and flipped through the binder page by page. Her hands trembled as she read. They told everyone you abandoned them, she whispered, her eyes wide. I know, I nodded. By the time she left, she promised me she'd never believe their side again. And word travels fast in families, especially when the matriarch shifts her loyalty. Cousins who had messaged me with accusations before started sending apologies. One even wrote, I had no idea. They made it sound so different. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down online. They posted vague statuses about betrayal and ungrateful children. But the comments weren't what they expected this time. People asked questions. People pushed back. Didn't Caleb pay your loan for years? One neighbor commented. I remember him working 2 jobs. For the first time, their narrative was cracking in public. And Ethan, he tried to call me too, his usual cocky tone faltering. Bro, you're making things worse. Just help out for a little while longer. You know I can't deal with this stuff. I almost laughed. That's the point, Ethan. You never could. And now you'll have to. Then I hung up. But the most satisfying moment came a few weeks later. My father showed up at my work. He tried to act calm, dressed in a suit that didn't quite hide the sweat on his brow. He pulled me aside into the lobby, lowered his voice, and said, You think you've won? You've embarrassed us. You've destroyed your own family. I looked him in the eye and, for the first time in my life, didn't flinch. No, Dad. I freed myself from it. He had no comeback. He just stood there, breathing hard, before finally walking out into the cold evening air. And as I watched him go, I realized the revenge wasn't about humiliating them. It was about reclaiming my life. They had built their comfort on my silence, and I had taken that silence away. That was the strike they never saw coming. Still, I knew there would be fallout. Their business was unraveling. Their reputation was slipping, and their grip on the family narrative was broken. And part of me couldn't help but wonder, how far would they go now that the mask was cracking? The fallout came faster than even I expected. Within a month, the bank officially seized control of my parents' business. The loan I had been propping up for years was now in default, and without me shielding them, there was nowhere left to hide. The small storefront that had once been my father's pride sat shuttered, a foreclosure sign slapped across the window. Neighbors whispered, customers drifted away, and the business that had consumed our family's entire identity was gone. At first, my parents tried to spin it. On Facebook, they wrote posts about how the economy is cruel and how not everyone understands the sacrifices we've made. But the comments section was no longer a chorus of sympathy. People had seen the cracks, heard the whispers, and more than a few had quietly heard my side of the story from my grandmother. The tone had shifted. Instead of, we're praying for you, there were questions. Didn't Caleb pay your loan for years? Why didn't Ethan step up? The once tight shield of public image was breaking. Ethan, of course, tried to play the victim, too. He sold the motorcycle that had once been the shining jewel of his existence, claiming he was making a mature decision for the family. But by then, no one was buying the act. Without the spotlight and praise, he looked like what he always had been, entitled and unprepared. For me, life kept moving forward. My job blossomed into a promotion faster than I anticipated, thanks to the distressed business project I'd been working on. It turned out my personal scars had made me sharp, observant, and relentless in spotting financial manipulation. My bosses noticed. By the end of the year, I wasn't just stable, I was thriving. The last time I saw my parents in person was at my cousin Chloe's wedding. They approached me cautiously, no longer with anger, but with that brittle politeness people use when they're out of options. My mom's smile was tight, her eyes searching my face for any sign of weakness. Caleb, she said softly, we've all made mistakes. Maybe it's time to forgive and move on. I studied her for a long moment, the weight of years pressing down, then finally shook my head. I did move on. You just weren't invited. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I saw the reality sink in. They no longer had power over me. No guilt to hold, no lies to twist, no strings to pull. As I turned and walked away, the chatter of the wedding filled the hall after, music, glasses clinking. It felt like the sound of a life I had finally claimed for myself. And that's when it hit me. Revenge hadn't been the binder or the bank or even the collapse of their lies. The real revenge was standing tall, while they were left scrambling in the ruins of a world they had built on my back. I left the hall with my head high, and for the first time in years, the air felt light. As I stepped outside into the cool night, I whispered to myself, let him handle it. And this time, I knew they finally understood what that meant.